Hello. Hello, hello, hello. All right, I think I got it. Hello, everyone. All right, I think we've worked out our tech issues. So hopefully we will be okay this time. Oh, whoa. I hit that with my knee, sorry. Keeping my eye out for Mary. There she is. I spot her. Let's hope this all works like it did on practice. Yay! Connection!
Yay! It's here. It's finally happening. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness gracious. Thank you, Facebook, for finally working with us, right?
Yes.
Oh my
Yes.
goodness gracious. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Beehives. Yay! I feel like we
Yes.
just need to like throw some bees in the emojis in the comments to show our excitement that we got this up and
Yes.
working. For those of you who didn't get to
Oh
see
my
the
God.
previous episodes,
Crazy.
Angela and I had a little bit of technical difficulty, but we are here. We worked it out, and Facebook got its act together, and we're ready. We're so excited.
Yes, we are. Let me get my so I want to just real quick and then I'll kick it over to Mary while I get my little live thing up.
Yeah.
So this is the beginning of A Leaf on the Wind of All Hallows. And the intro song is actually Leaf on the Wind, and that's from the movie Serenity. And matter of fact, the little fun trivia is that Diana was going to actually call this A Leaf on the Wind instead of the All Hallows, and then because
Oh.
she didn't want it to be a copy of this because there's so many like things that kind of connect it
Crossover. Yeah.
already, and so they don't. She wanted to kind of make that definition clear from this, so she added
Smart.
the All Hallows bit. So we have Mary here. Hello, the Hive. Welcome to the Beehive of Outlander Cast Book Club. My name is Angela. I'm a blog writer for Outlander Cast blog, and I also lead this Beehive Book Club, reading club for Outlander Cast Book Club. So I'm glad you could join us today. We're discussing our second retail of our two-run novella, and it's called A Leaf on the Wind of All Hallows. It's technically a short story by, like, where you break down novellas and short stories, but it's like just barely in the short story realm by like a couple hundred 500 words or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So and we'll be covering this one for 2 weeks. So Mary, you go ahead and I'm going to bring up my thing here.
Love it. Yes, I'm so excited to begin with you all this story. It's very, very unique. And as Angela said, this is our second story of this summertime series that we've been doing. The first was The Space Between, which is absolutely phenomenal. It was my first time reading that story as well, and it blew me away. So if you missed it, there are a couple of ways to watch it. You can find them in the announcement section here in the Outlander Cast Clan Book Club, clicking the event tab of this as well as my and my husband Blake's YouTube page. So if you're watching this on YouTube, hello, make sure that you comment as well. And yes, our YouTube, Mary and Blake on YouTube. So I wanted to say a little hello to everybody who's tuning in right now. If you can tell me where you're tuning in from, and also what if this is like your first time reading this story or not. If you're going to be reading it along the first time with me, and if it is your first story, let me know how many times you've been reading it, as we are just so excited to have you all here tonight. So I see,
okay.
Yeah, you want me to say a little hello? We got Mary and Susan and Ellen and Carla. Ruth, I see you here. Hi, Janice. Hi, Diane. Hi, Donna. Hi, Claudine. So many great people here. Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Is anyone reading it for the first time? Did you already ask that?
I asked that. They're starting to let it up. Audra. Audra says that it is going to be her first time as well.
Okay. Or Audra's here with her mom. She joins a Outlander, the book club group with her mom as a duo.
Yay!
So yeah, so that's kind of neat.
That's
Her
so
mom's name's
cool.
Patty. And Why did I write that question twice? Like, see, I did that. Sorry if I confused you with
Oh
that.
my gosh, it's
Um,
okay.
so the Beehive is like currently working through a prep for bees, which is coming out on the 23rd of November. We just finished section 1 of Moby, and we are starting section 2, which is all about the Mac life.
Yay!
I
Yes.
love the Mac sections of Moby. It's like some of my favorite stuff. So it's actually, for me, it's the really fun part of that
Yes.
book. And so I'm really excited to jump in. We'll be doing that on Monday night. I had it originally slotted for Sunday, but then I realized I was biting off a little more than I could probably chew by doing the other half of this on Friday and then trying to do that on Sunday. It's just too much. So I need that extra day. So I moved it to Monday night, just for this week. We normally
You
wouldn't
are
do Monday
doing
night.
a lot, girlfriend. Yes. And then, as you said, we've been having all these Facebook difficulties, so we are thankful for the
Yeah, it
flexibility.
kind of compressed this whole thing for me. So, and I don't want to like back everything up another week because we're running on a deadline here for bees. So,
Back to
um,
school and bees,
yes,
exactly.
right. If you are watching on the Facebook club page, Facebook Outlander Cast Clan
Book
Facebook
club,
group,
yes.
thank you.
I got you, girl.
I,
I
I
got you.
screw it up all the time. Um, Make sure that you hit going on all of the Beehive events. It's important so that you know if we change anything, so that you know when we put up extras, which I usually at least put up 1 or 2 things for every time we have a live to kind of immerse you in the world and get you more, like,
Yes.
make the world real for you with all of these little extra little pieces. Um, and every past live study event that we've had over the last 15, 16 months or so, including the Lord John study, including Echo and the Bone and the Moby, what we've done so far, all the associated extras with each event are located in the events tab on the book club Facebook page. So if you go to the events tab, then click past events, and you want to follow our order, you can just go down to the bottom. We started with Brotherhood of the Blade, and you can just zoom on up and follow us. And if you comment, I'll still see the comments, so I'll come back over and say, "Oh, you're checking this out now. Great. How you liking it?"
Yes.
So go ahead, Mary.
Oh yeah, no, I just wanted to I love that. I love that people can be joining in at any point in the adventure. Okay, so there's
I do
big
too.
news. I'm so excited. You're gonna want to make sure that you are a part of the Bees Release Extravaganza. I'm doing my spirit fingers. If I could be throwing up emojis or hearts in our lives, I would be doing that. So mark your calendars, the Bees
Is that
Party.
jazz hands? Is that what that
That
is?
is
Jazz
jazz
hands?
hands. It's also sign language for clapping. So I love to do it on Zooms and lives because we can't all clap without messing up all the audio
Right.
stuff now. So the party is going to be November 21st. Mark it in your calendars, okay? It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be exciting. There's going to be so many great things. The release of the book will be 36 hours from there. So this will like get you pumped, allow you to have a little nap, and then it's go time, okay? So there is information already available. I'm going to post it live now in the Facebook chat, so you can already click that you're going. You are going to want to make sure that you are in our Facebook group. Once again, if you're watching this on YouTube later, it is the Outlander Cast Clan Book Club. Lots of exciting things. And let's see. So yeah, sorry, Angela, I'm just seeing this because you wrote my name, Mary. So I just want to make sure that you were thinking
Yeah, I
that I
wanted
would
you to
still be reading
announce
that.
it.
Okay,
Yes,
so many have been asking if Angela will be covering bees in the beehive, and the answer is, of course she is. And even what's going to happen is there's going to be a 6-month waiting period after the release. So that way it also allows, season 6 of the show to air. During the season, things are just crazy busy, of course, with all the blogging and the live podcasting that we have going on with myself and Blake. So there's going to be a lot going on with Outlander Cast in general. And most likely the
definitely.
season will finish before the 6 months are up. So then Angela is saying, most likely the end of May, beginning of June is when the Bees read along is going to begin right here in this book club. Right, Angela?
That's right. And no spoilers, please, for Bees on the book club before that. We may step down. I have to consult with Mary. We may step down to like spoilers with Dot after a couple months.
Yeah.
But we want to wait till 6 months to have at least before we have like free spoilers and stuff on that page, because we want to give people a chance to read it without being spoiled.
Yeah.
And everybody's not going to probably be
We'll have
exactly like us,
spoiler like
where we stay
areas.
bleary-eyed and read for hours on end until we can't hold our eyes open anymore, so we can get it done in a week. Some people are going to take longer. So, well, for tonight, don't spoil what's going to happen in the second half of this story. If you've already read it, Mary has not read it, and you know you don't want to spoil that. So, okay, Mary, anything else you want to announce before we get started?
Really, that's it. Blake and I are continuing to podcast about the Last Kingdom and the Potterverse, still going along. So if you want to check those out, and if you are new to Outlander cast and new to me, and you'd like to know more about myself and Blake, we actually have a podcast where we've covered every single one of the television episodes. We've had loads of great interviews with cast and crew over the years. So just go to outlandercast.com. You're going to see the podcast, see all the blog posts, see everything that we've done up until now. And of course, we're getting ready, for season 6 to be coming. So just a lot of excitement. Like once fall begins, it's going to be so many things to be thankful for in the Outlander fandom.
And let me just tell you, if you haven't listened to Mary and Blake's podcast on Outlander Cast, you really have to. You're missing out on a lot of fun. Mary and Blake are really, they're great with whatever they tackle. I mean, all of their podcasts are great. Probably one of my favorites was the Leftovers podcast that they did, because it was new for me too. Whereas the Outlander Cast book, show, I read the book, so it's kind of like not new stuff, but it's fun to experience like the new stuff I've never done before with them for the first time as well. But with the Outlander cast, that was my first podcast I ever listened to. It was my first fan group that I would belong to with Outlander. So it's been a long time, but
it's blossomed to what it is now.
Yes, we were just this little we only had one little Facebook group. It was a big deal when we started the Facebook group. I remember that, and I remember when we hit 1,000 members. So I go back a ways. So
OG.
But yes, but I have stuck here all this time because I love it. It's like home. It's like a home for me. So make sure that you enjoy all the other things that Mary and Blake offer, because they have a whole slew of stuff. I mean, they can keep you entertained 24/7, really. So, especially if you go in their back stuff. I know that they've kind of been on the quiet side right now, but there's a lot of, if you haven't experienced them, there's a lot of back stuff to experience that to keep you busy. Yeah. So, Mary, this story is a real turn from where we were in Space Between. Very big turn. And we started back in 1941 during World War II. We follow the story of Roger's parents, who died in the war before we met Roger at age 4 or 5, curled up in a little chair in the Reverend's house in Outlander. So we could, in a way, call this a prequel, but in the world of connective threads and time travel, is anything really a prequel? You know what I mean?
I know,
We're constantly going back and forth. Nothing's really a prequel in this story. It is a prequel that at one point it syncs time and story with the last book. So it's part prequel, part main story, part epilogue. So it kind of has a little bit of everything in this story, which is quite a feat for Diana to accomplish that in such a short story. It may be short, but Diana usually packs a big punch in these bulges and these short stories and novellas that usually recontextualize everything, throw a whole new light onto the main story and characters, which this one does as well. Diana says that, this is a little Diana deed, in response to new light on the side story, she said that on Roger and Frank's story, she says, well, in the fullness of time, people will probably figure out that all the little pieces fit somewhere. The Lord John books, the short stories, etc. I mean, it's not that there aren't any loose ends left over. Life is messy. There's always loose ends, but you will see things all start to fit into a big picture.
Yes.
So since we're in a news story, I'm going to skip the listener feedback for this one time. I do have one or two things that were said in our little pre-buzz that I had impromptu when we kind of crapped out on the last one.
Facebook.
But overall, everyone loved our look at the space between, and they're very excited for this story. I also have, like I said, a couple of Diana D's. I just shared one in place of feedback, so I know you all love hearing those as well. So, Mary, before we break this down, how many honey pots do you give this story so far?
Well, it's so tough because we are only covering it in 2 weeks. So
Uh-huh.
I don't want to, I want to give it a 5 already. That's really where I'm
Right.
at. Like, I just want to give it a 5 already. And I feel badly because sometimes you want to like set the bar a little lower so that there's room to grow. But on the flip
Mm-hmm.
side, there are only 2 weeks of this. So it is okay that I loved it as much as I did because I'm giving it 5 big honey pots right away. I'm not holding anything
All
back.
right.
Yes. How about you?
Good for you. I am giving it a 4.85. It's basically, I'm scaling it back because I need the room to go up next week. Next week is amazing.
Oh,
Um,
yay.
and I love so many little things about this story, but I especially love getting more color and insight on
Mm-hmm.
two characters that I frequently find myself defending in the
Mm-hmm.
Outlander verse, Roger and Frank.
Yes.
I love Roger. I mean, I don't love Frank, but I like Frank. I don't
Yeah.
like see all the evilness that some people tend to always want to
No.
villainize him. I don't see him that way. And so this gives new light on the people that crafted Roger. You see a lot
Yes.
of little nods to Roger and his parents, and
Mm-hmm.
you also get a whole new light on Frank in this
Yes.
story. And I love all of the Outlander male protagonists. All the male
Agreed.
like people that get POV chapters, they're all like I love them all. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and I know that makes me sound like, oh, I love everything. It's really not that way. But with the male character, she just writes them all good. They're
She has
all
a
so
fun voice.
unique. Jamie, Roger, John, Ian, William. I
Yes.
love them all, and they're all
Yes.
like different. So,
Mm-hmm.
I love the Gabaldon men. So sue me.
Yeah.
but but Frank is a big enigma, wrapped in a mystery, surrounded by intrigue.
Of
He's just this.
course.
Oh, he's this one that Diana keeps kind of in the shadow, and that you just kind of find a little more penny drop on him in each book. You
Yep.
get a little more color, a little more color. So I always love any new pieces to plug into the Frank puzzle, which you get in this
Mm-hmm.
book. And this is like a nice picture of him and his warriors,
Agreed.
from and one of the things one of our people said, I think it was Terry, she used the term, it's the only time we've ever gotten a male gaze on this character, which is true. We've never seen Frank with
Oh,
anybody but
Claire.
Claire and Bree.
Free. Yeah.
So it's really interesting that that's correct. We get like a male view of him,
That's
so
really
that's
cool.
cool. And so I also love all the detail in history. She kind of does this story like a homage to the
Mm-hmm.
World War II vets and the flyers and all of that stuff. She really kind of sinks you in that world, which I love. It's a really awful time period, and this young couple was very brave to go through this treacherous time,
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I loved. And good, bad, great for you for this section, Mary.
My good was just exploring some different time frame and seeing things from a different perspective. This little microcosm of time that we didn't really necessarily get to cover that much through the rest of the series. So like you were saying, like even though it is kind of a prequel, it's all still part of this tapestry. It's a beautiful quilt. So we keep putting patches into it. We have things earlier and further, and I'm loving that the quilt is coming together. So I just like that this is a different insight into a time period that I didn't know too much about in this universe.
Right,
My bad for this
right.
bit, once again, I gave this a 5. So like there's not a lot of bads. I think the bad would only be on my end for not necessarily knowing all of the references in regards to the World War
The
crafts and the
terminology.
language, all the different terminology. But thanks to you, Angela, and all your little extras, that really helped solidify and kind of fill in the blanks in my mind as I was reading. Because as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to underline that and look up what that means.
Right.
It's just me. It's just the age that I
It's
was
her
into.
immersing you. It's her
Ye-
immersing you in that world and the way they talk
Exactly.
and everything else.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's the way they talk, they don't necessarily say like this meant blah 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 blah. Like
Right.
Diana's sitting there saying, "My readers are smart. They either know what it is or they are going to go look it up." You know,
Yes.
it's that's how she is, which I love about her. But it sat me
Right.
there scratching my head, saying, "I need to look up a lot of
So
these
that's
things."
when you go to Blake and say, Blake, what the hell is this? What's that? You got to ask your hubby, your
Exactly.
history hubby.
And this is like one of his favorite time periods to really, delve into. So, and then my great was hanging out with some familiar faces that I wasn't, once, expecting to see inside this. I really tried to know nothing about this storyline aside from the fact that you said
Mhm.
it's Roger's parents. That's all you're
Right.
telling me. Like it's gonna be about Roger's parents, and I was like, okay, leave it at that. So it was just
Right.
exciting to be a little familiar.
So to see Frank and stuff, is that who you mean?
hmm And just to like see little Roger, baby
Little
Roger.
Roger, little baby Roger. I know, he's so
Yes.
cute.
Yes. Just to have, that's what I mean. Like the familiar faces, like, you get to see them in different little places. And then the only other
Yeah.
question that I have, which may be like completely, who is this Paul? Is it the Comte, Paul Ricazzi?
I have that in my notes to bring up to you.
Yeah,
Did you
that's
notice the
another familiar
familiar name?
face. Yes. And I'm like, what the hell is he doing here? So is it the comp? Is the comp flying around
Well,
playing?
we're gonna get over that, but Diana says that um, it could be important.
Yeah,
She
he's
said
trying
she
to find
does
those
it.
standing
I
stones.
have the quote when I get there, but
Okay.
basically, yeah, okay. Let's just
But
wait till we
but
get
that
there.
was my great, is it was like, Frank,
But I'm
I
glad
get to
you
hang out with
picked up
Roger.
on it. I'm
Why is
glad
the
you
comp
picked up on
here?
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's probably because we just read that story because it's kind of like
Yes.
snuck in. And if you didn't have it fresh in your mind, you wouldn't probably pick up. But now you're like,
No.
whoa.
Oh yeah.
So mine was, which is well, some of it's similar to yours. I have for the good, I have the historical imagery and detail. Winston Churchill said, never have so many owed so much as so few about the RAF pilots
hmm
during World War II. So it's such a powerful statement and very poignant in relation to this story. And Jerry really exemplifies this. You really see his bravery and the fragility of life in this time. You know what I mean? When
hmm
you read this story. And she wove in a lot of details like Sailor Milan, who was a real person who really wrote those 10 commandments of air flying. Like she wove him in. She wove in the 10 rules of air fighting, the plane details, the flying maneuvers, the danger. Even the guy that died that he took, that is the reason they called him up, was because the other guy that he was friends with, his good friend that had taught him all the Polish,
Yeah.
died a month before or something like that. So he was
hmm
the only one that knew Polish left in their little squadron. And that person is a real person, this guy Kalata Weeks or whatever his name was. And so Diana D on that, I loved working in the World War II setting, if only briefly. I saw Churchill's war rooms in London this past August. Gave me such complex feelings for the people who worked down there. Researching the Spitfire pilots was fascinating. What a group of men. Sailor Milan is real, by the way, and so are his 10 Commandments of flying. So
So
she
cool.
really enjoyed immersing herself in this world and getting to learn a lot about like the people that did this sacrifice.
hmm
Um, you see her homage to their bravery and all they did. It does feels like a tribute to them.
Yes.
My bad is I wish we had a little more of Jerry and Dolly, a little more look at their couplehood. You know what I mean? We
Yes.
got basically like one little glimpse of one little section of them, and I would have loved to had a little more of them.
Yeah.
Um, Diana's very good at layering all these levels of complexity into the characters and that we already
hmm
know well. And it's interesting to see also that. Oh, wait a minute, I skipped ahead. That was what I do wish there was more for Jerry and Dolly.
Yeah.
And my great is the characters and Dolly, especially Jerry and Frank. Diane is very good at layering the levels of complexity into the characters and that we think we already know well, and her
hmm
just kind of throwing another layer in there that changes
Yep.
them and things a little bit. And it's very interesting here, like when you think about it, that Bree and Roger's dad had this connection. You know what I mean? Bree and Roger's
Yes,
dads
yes.
knew each other, had this connection. And like I said, Terry said about the male gaze on Frank. This is like a new
Mhm.
thing. So all of that's very good. So, Mary, let's break this down. We have scene one. First line says it was 2 weeks yet to Halloween, but the gremlins were already at work. And Diana is like the queen of intriguing first lines. Right away, you're like going, uh-oh, the hands of fate are
Yep.
beginning to conjure, you know? And so it's 2 weeks prior to Halloween, and pilot Jerry McKenzie is getting ready for takeoff in his Spitfire, named Dolly after his wife, which I love, that he
So
paints the little
sweet.
Dolly on his plane. It's just so cute. And there's a mechanical problem. He has to abort his takeoff. And as the mechanic runs over, Jerry jumps out of the cockpit, spots the problem. There's a punctured fuel line, and Jerry's thankful that he wasn't discovered when he was already up in the air. So the mechanic lets Jerry know that he won't fly until the next day. And he
Mhm.
kind of shoos this Jerry off. Jerry's kind of like all up on this plane. He's very slow to leave.
Yes.
He's concerned for his plane, and he walks away after the mechanic like is like, just go, I'll take care of her, I'll take care of her. And he was almost like a mother with a sick child. You know what I mean? The
Mhm.
way he was
Mhm.
acting over this plane. So we get this, we plunge right into a picture of Jerry here as we kick off this story, that this event that happens that keeps him grounded, that makes him having access to Frank to have this conversation.
Yeah.
So what did you learn about Jerry just off this first little brief sequence that we saw
You know
from
that he's
him?
a confident
What jumped
man.
out to you?
Yeah, how confident he is, how assured of his own abilities, and his comfortable, just his plane, like how comfortable he is with the plane, that he knows what is wrong. I liked being in a stranger's voice, so while we're reading these books, we're like with familiar people, so to be with somebody else whose style of speaking and whose way about him is so foreign from other characters. When you're reading Diana's
Mm-hmm.
books, you're used to these people. So I felt like I was in good hands with
Yes,
Jerry. I really was like,
yes.
okay, you know, we're
And he's
good.
very competent, and you see he has like a lot of pride in his work. He has a
Yes.
lot of pride in his plane. He takes
Hmm.
care of stuff. He has like this sense of you know knowledge, and he's very knowledgeable. Like he got out,
Yes.
didn't wait for the mechanic, pulled it apart, wanted to know what's wrong with his baby. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
Yep. Right away.
it was like
Exactly.
definitely a man toy.
Yes.
And what were your first vibes like when you first started reading this story? What were your first vibes? It was such a different tone and setting than anything we've read in this series so far. So did you kind of like go, oh, this is different? What was your first vibe when you first started reading this first section?
I was on edge in a
Because
good
it's a whole
way.
different setting. It's a whole
Yes.
different thing.
And he mentioned several times, like there's even one line where he says adrenaline from the aborted flight was still surging through him. So like this
Hmm.
whole first bit, you feel that adrenaline rush in him. And I think with so many characters, I haven't necessarily felt that. And already knowing too, we're in a wartime setting. And of course, we are, we as the readers in the future, knowing what's happening, knowing what side they're on, knowing that what they're about to find out. My feeling, my vibe really was from this anticipation and an anxious kind of place. You know what I mean? You just
Hmm.
felt the energy of Jerry the entire time.
Yes, definitely. Yes. He's just, I think he's just so cute the way he's so protective over the plane.
Hmm.
Um, so this section two, explains how Jerry came to meet Frank Randall with the Secret Intelligence Service of the UK, which is MI6, which deals mainly with covert overseas collection and analysis of human intelligence in support of UK national security. So Jerry returns from showering to find Group Captain Sailor Milan waiting to speak with him, and he thinks, "Not great, Bob. This is
No,
not great,
not great.
Bob."
Not great.
And Jerry's on guard. Jerry's on guard. When Milan says, "Lieutenant," he calls him
Yes.
by his title,
Which he says is
"Lieutenant."
not good.
And I'm just going to read a little brief excerpt here. Milan rose from his seat, smiling. The very man I had in mind. The devil he had, Jerry thought, arranging his face into a look of respectful expectancy. Milan could not have possibly heard about Dolly's spot of bother yet. And he should be in the air now. So he could have been expecting him or looking for him. And he
Yeah.
says, Milan hadn't been looking for Jerry. He just thought he'd do for whatever job was up. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that the group captain had called him by rank rather than his name meant it probably wasn't a job that anyone would volunteer for. He
Nope.
didn't have time to worry about what that might be, though. Milan was introducing him to the other man, a tallish chap in army uniform with dark hair and a pleasant if sharp look about him. Eyes like a good sheepdog's, he thought,
Mm.
nodding in reply to Captain Randall's greeting. Kindly, maybe, but he won't miss much. So as this scene plays out, you start picking up all these little traces of one of Roger's best assets in Jerry. You know what I'm thinking of with this? I don't know if you know what I'm thinking of.
No, I don't.
Um, um, Roger is
Into
has high observation
Yeah.
skills and perception and reading people
Yeah, I was gonna say
and
his
quick
intuition. Yeah.
thinking. Yes, he's very, very good at that. And it's all that leans into the Mac mojo that I always talk about, like
Yep.
that ability to read people.
Yep.
And so he has that as well. And you see this all along through this story,
Mm-hmm.
that sense of being able to read people, pick up things, perceiving all the details of things. He's very
Yes.
sharp that way. And you can see Roger gets that from him.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see this reflected all through. So Milan says Randall's from Ops. And you get the impression he's saying this because they're walking in earshot of other people,
Mm-hmm.
for the benefit of those people. But Jerry's wincing and gathering his own take on
Yes.
Frank as they make their way to the flake man. His eye catches Dolly being towed. And so this
Mm-hmm.
is where I'm going to play our first short clip here. Now, this is not Davina reading, FYI. So it's not the same.
No.
Just so you know.
Jerry grimaced, followed, casting a longing glance downfield at Dolly, who was being towed ignominiously into the hangar. The rag doll painted on her nose was blurred, the black curls partially dissolved by weather and spilled petrol. Well, he'd touch it up later, when he'd heard the details of whatever horrible job the stranger had brought. His gaze rested resentfully on Randall's neck, and the man turned suddenly, glancing back over his shoulder as though he felt the stress of Jerry's regard. Jerry felt a qualm in the pit of his stomach as half-recognized observations, the lack of insignia on the uniform, that air of confidence peculiar to men who kept secrets, gelled with the look in the stranger's eye. "Ops are dealing my Aunt Fanny," he thought. He wasn't even surprised as Sailor waved Randall through the door to hear the group captain lean close and murmur in his ear, "Careful, he's a funny bugger." Jerry nodded, stomach tightening. Milan didn't mean Captain Randall was either humorous or a Freemason. Funny bugger in this context meant only one thing: MI6.
So before we even, like Frank says a word, what are some things you learn about Frank at first glance through Jerry's eyes? And what else jumps out about Jerry in this section?
I mean, once again, to me, it was his intuition. It
Mm-hmm.
was his humor, like the humor, like my Aunt Fanny. Like I just love that.
I
It's
love
funny
his
to hear.
humor too.
Yeah, it's funny to hear through this audible because my voice for Jerry was very, very different. This guy reading,
Yeah,
he's very calm. So when I
yeah.
read Opposite Ealing, my Aunt Fanny, like I like I just felt like a little bit more sass and
That,
humor with Jerry
yeah,
than this audible
I'm
reader
not
just did.
overjoyed with his reading. I
He's calm
agree.
though. He's very calming. And no, once again, just that great intuition. And the stuff with Frank, like, we all knew what he did. We all knew it, but just to see it in action right now has been really,
Hmm.
really neat. Just that Jerry can pick on the air that he has about him.
That he's a
I
person that
really like
comes off
that.
like
Keeps
he keeps a lot
secrets.
of secrets. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I really like
Like
that.
somebody that has kind eyes, but he doesn't miss it and miss it much.
No.
I like that too.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of tells you
Yes.
that he's very sharp and he sees things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, any other thoughts, observations about this section before we get to the next section?
That the only thing that confused, can I ask you something that confused me? So
Sure.
the rag doll painted the nose, that's the red tip of the plane. I didn't know the black curls partially dissolved by weather. Did he actually have like a doll? Like, or was it just the nose?
It was on the
Did he
nose means the
paint?
whole like front of the plane. Like I did a
Yeah.
picture on the thing, like
Yeah.
the side of the front of the plane, kind of,
Yeah.
And it was like a little, like like a Betty Boop kind of thing, like a
Okay,
little
now I'm
rag doll that's
yes.
supposed to look like his wife, with the
Yes.
black
Okay.
curly hair like
Now I'm
his
better
wife had.
understanding. Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's
Because I
it's
was,
kind of like he's carrying his wife with him in the sky by painting the
yeah.
little picture of
Because I
her on
thought
the
the nose
plane.
was just that little tip, so then I was getting
No, it's kind
confused.
of
Like
the
how?
front part,
Yes.
of the
Okay.
plane.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I did a pictures and I showed like here's one that would have a picture like somebody that painted something right in the same kind of area that
Yeah.
he would have. Um, so section 3 we get into Jerry and Frank. Whoa, sorry about my lights blinking. I need a new light bulb here. We get into Jerry and Frank. And the Jerry and Frank scenes are really interesting for both characters because once alone, Frank lets him know straight up that he's from MI6. He doesn't
Yeah.
make no bones about it, and that they want him for a special mission. So I'm going to play
Mhm.
our next little clip here.
Captain Randall was from the secret arm of British intelligence. He made no bones about it once Milan had deposited them.
Okay, you want to keep playing?
The Audible guy knew that we were talking about him badly, so now he's decided to pout.
Oh my goodness! You know what? I'll just read it. Do I have my thing with me?
I have my book if you need it.
Yeah, go ahead. You read that.
Okay.
Um,
So where it says smiled back in an
yeah,
involuntary
read from where
response.
In the vacant office and left
Oh,
them to
here we
it.
go.
Come back.
We're wanting a pilot, a good pilot, he added with a faint smile, to fly solo reconnaissance. A new project, very special. Solo? Where? Jerry asked warily. Spitfires normally flew in four-plane flights, or in larger configurations, all the way up to an entire squadron, 16 planes. In formation, they could cover each other to some extent against the heavier Heinpools and Messerschmitts, but they seldom flew alone by choice. I'll tell you that a bit later. First, are you fit, do you think? Jerry reared back a bit at that, stung.
I love
What
that.
did this bloody poppin think he... Then he caught a glance at his reflection in the window pane. Eyes red as a mad boar's, his wet hair sticking up in spikes, a fresh red bruise spreading on his forehead, and his blouson stuck to him in damp patches where he hadn't bothered to dry off before dressing. Extremely fit, he snapped. Sir. Randall lifted a hand half an inch, dismissing the need for sirs. I meant your knee, he said mildly. Oh, Jerry said, disconcerted. That? Aye, it's fine. He'd taken 2 bullets through his right knee a year before, when he'd dived after a 109 and neglected to see another one that popped out of nowhere behind him and peppered his arse. On fire, but terrified of bailing out into a sky filled with smoke, bullets, and random explosions, he'd ridden his burning plane down,
Wow.
both of them screaming as they fell out of the sky, Dolly one's metal skin so hot it had seared his left forearm through his jacket, his right foot squelching in the blood that filled his boot as he stamped the pedal. Made it, though, and had been on the sick and hurt list for 2 months. He still limped very noticeably, but he didn't regret his smashed patella. He'd had his 2nd month's sick leave at home, and wee Roger had come along 9 months later. He smiled broadly at the thought of his lad, and Randall smiled back in involuntary response.
So I love learning how Roger came to be.
Yes.
Which is really interesting because we'll remind me to come back around to this at the end of next week because it's going to connect with it in a way. So I love learning how Roger came to be, and it's like the silver cloud around Jerry's injury that he had. And like I said, this will be especially interesting when we get to the end of the story. But it's really interesting because it's the only leave he had produced Roger. And so, and now he's going to go back for the only other leave he had where he got to see Roger. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So basically,
Yes.
both leaves involved, like where one he produced Roger, one he got to see Roger and hold him for
Yes.
the only time he really gets to hold him,
Yep.
at this point. And so, um, so it already seems like you already are getting this very heroic picture of Jerry. He's just went
Mhm.
through like he tells you the story of this thing, and rather than try to bail out, he rides the plane down to try to get
Yeah.
out of the sky a little bit, which is scary. You're going down in this plane all the
Right?
way
The last
down
thing
to
you want to
to
do.
ground it. Yeah, and then he went through this terrible crash, and screwed up his leg and was out for 2 months, and here he is about to now take on this mission. Not even a year later, that's pretty much almost a suicidal
Yeah.
mission, to take
Yeah.
it on.
Hmm.
So he's already like, didn't you get like this heroic impression just from what he said so far from that
Yes.
story?
I mean, for him to be still flying and his boot is filling up with blood and to be able to still like pull it together. I mean, honestly,
Mhm.
if I was shot twice in the knee, I would not be able to do everything and then
Right,
eventually go back to work. Like for him to have the
right.
mental capacity to like,
And take
yes,
on
take
this
his leave and
mission.
then, yes, this is a
Oh no,
hero.
yes, he's only a year ago, and now he's eager to get back up in the air, willing to do what's needed to serve. And we also get this clear picture in that little back memory of
Hmm.
his immense love for his wife and son. It's
Hmm.
already evident because he carries her with him on the plane, paints her on the
Yes.
plane, and all of this other stuff. And another little Diana deet is at that time, just before she wrote this story, Diana had a real bad situation with her knee, busted up her own patella, had to, had to get multiple surgeries. There was like a whole thing people knew about her injury. And so she said she had a couple of knee surgeries. She said um, that she gave Jerry her wonky knee. Like that was like a thing about
I
from
love
her that she
that.
gave to him, her knee that
Oh
she
my
was
gosh,
dealing with.
so cute.
So like I thought that was cute. So here's the second part of this scene.
Bonds.
Hopefully it'll work.
Good, he said. You're all right to fly along?
Why is this happening? And I'm going to just, come on. Let me get my book.
I've got mine here too.
Okay. So that this is going to do this now, I
Yeah.
have to work around it.
Page 232.
232. Thank
Halfway.
you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yeah, let me just do this. Close this. Close up. Why do I take the time
Goodbye,
to read?
Audible Man.
Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, so 232. Okay, good. You're all right to fly a long mission then. Jerry shrugged. How long can it be in a Spitfire? Unless you're thought of a way to refuel up in the air. He meant that as a joke and was further disconcerted to see Randall's lips purse a little, as though thinking whether to tell him that they had. It is a Spitfire you mean me to fly? He asked, uncertain. Christ, what if it was one of those new experimental birds they'd heard about now and again? His skin prickled with the combination of fear and excitement. But Randall nodded. Oh, yes, certainly. Nothing else is maneuverable enough, and there may be a good bit of ducking and dodging. What we've done is take the Spitfire 2, remove one pair of wing guns, and refit it with a pair of cameras. One pair? Again, that slight pursing of the lips. Randall replied, you might need the second pair of guns. Oh, aye. Well, then. The immediate notion, as Randall explained it, was for Jerry to go to Northumberland, where he'd spent 2 weeks being trained in the use of wing cameras, taking pictures of selected bits of landscape at different altitudes, and where he worked with a support team who were meant to be trained in keeping the cameras functioning in bad weather. They teach him how to get the film out without ruining it, just in case he had to, after which, I can't tell you exactly where you'll be going, Randall said. His manner, though, through the conversation had been intent, but friendly, joking now and then. Now all trace of joviality had vanished. He was dead serious. Eastern Europe is all I can say just now. Jerry felt his inside hollow out a little and took a deep breath to fill the empty space. He could say no, but he'd signed up to be an RAF flyer, and that's what he was. All right. Will I maybe see my wife once before I go then? Randall's face softened a little at that, and Jerry saw the captain's thumb touch his own gold wedding ring in reflex. I think that can be arranged. So, I know.
I love it.
So your reflections here, what did you think about seeing this different perspective of Frank in this scene? What new bits did you notice about both he and Jerry?
You know, first off, the whole him touching his ring, we all know, my husband Blake loves Frank, so I've been able to see Frank through his eyes.
I'll do the
We need
Whitney.
our Whitney.
We'll always love you. Okay.
No, I love it. Whenever there are these moments where like Frank really shines in such a beautiful, good light, in particular to his relationship with Claire and how he feels about Claire, it stands out to me so much, particularly because I'm just like, oh my gosh, Blake loves him so much, and I get it. And also then too, it pulls me to Jerry, that is the first thing that Jerry asks. Can I please see my wife before I do this? There's probably 1,000 other questions that he could have been asking at that moment in regards to the mission, in regards to all sorts of things. But his first thing goes to his wife. And I think that it's just both of these men care for their women so desperately much.
And I like that he noticed it. I like that
Yes.
Jerry noticed him do that as well. Like he understands, like he gets it, And what is the shared moment of Frank touching his ring when Jerry asks to see his wife before he goes tell you about him?
Oh, just that he misses Claire, that he wishes he could
misses
right
Claire.
now.
Yeah, to see her, yeah. And just he always said she's always on his mind while he's there. Like it's like a thing that he understands it. And understand, what does the request to see Marjorie and the response tell you about the mission?
Oh, that it's dangerous and this could easily end his life. You know what I mean?
Easily.
That for Jerry to know, can I please see my wife one more time? And for Frank to be able to say, like, we can make that arrange. That if it wasn't a life or death possibility, that they'd say, buddy, you can see her when you get back. Okay?
Yes.
We can table that. And for Frank to be able to like,
yeah, we chance he's not going to make it back. Like he's going into this, they both understand that this request means it's a very dangerous. If you're going into Eastern Europe, it's a dangerous situation. Exactly. And you're going solo. You don't even have like wingmen, you know what I mean, to help you if you have to get out. So okay, so scene 4, this is in Marjorie's POV. And I didn't like the guy reading Marjorie, so I already planned to read this one, so it was actually pretty good. The little excerpts that I pulled out anyway.
Yes.
So what a poignant, lovely, warm little scene between this young couple in love before Jerry leaves on this highly dangerous mission. And he gets one night with Dolly, okay? Yeah. And he makes the most of it. And he also gets his first look at his infant son. So you figure that, Roger's probably like 3 months or so, 3-4 months old at this point. And it gives a glimpse of what life was like for young couples in which the spouse was part of this like combat mission in World War II. And it captures all like how they have to capture these little fleeting moments together and try to live each little moment to the fullest. You really get that sense in this scene.
Yes.
And they've spent all night making love. Dolly wants to do everything she possibly can to help him, to sustain him, to give him something to come back for and all that kind of stuff, to put charms on him, and to bring him home to her. It's so cute. So in the early morning, it's still dark. Jerry's still sleeping. She opens the window crack and she breathes on the window and she puts a little heart with a J in it. And she says, it faded at once, of course, but that didn't matter. The charm would be there when the light came in, invisible, but there, standing between her husband and the sky. When the light came, it would fall just so across his pillow, and she'd see his sleeping face in the light, the jack straw hair, the fading bruise on his temple, the deep-set eyes, closed and innocent. He looked so young, asleep, almost as young as he really was, only 22, too young to have such lines in his face. She touched the corner of her mouth, but couldn't feel the crease the mirror showed her. Her mouth was swollen, tender, and the ball of her thumb ran across her lower lip lightly to and fro. What else? What else? What more could she do for him? He left her with something of himself. Perhaps there would be another baby, something he gave her, something she could give him as well. Another baby, another child to raise alone. Even so, she whispered, her mouth tightening, face raw from hours of stubble kissing. Neither of them had been able to wait for him to shave. Even so, at least he got to see Roger, hold his little boy, and have little boy stick up milk all down the back of his shirt. Jerry yelped in surprise, but he hadn't let her take Roger back. He held his son and petted him until the wee Manny fell asleep, only then laying him down in his basket and stripping off the stained shirt before coming to her. So you really sense Marjorie's desperation there, and this insight to Jerry's love of Roger is so like, it reminded me so much of what we see in Roger, especially that scene when he first comes, in Drums of Autumn, when he comes back and they kind of aren't getting along right away, and then the parents leave them. He says, I'm going to go up with Claire, you go down and whatever. And he tries to kind of like connect with Bree for the first time, really connect with her, get her to say, okay, let's give this a go. And he takes the baby and he says, I haven't had a proper look at my son yet, you know? And she says, well, everything's there. And he looked. And so when he started to like, she gave it to him, and when he started to put, he's like, no, I got it. And he held the baby, kind of like, even though instead of giving it right back to her. And it reminded me of so much of that scene, you know, that he wasn't going to be like messed up over this baby fussing or whatever. Which I love.
So sweet.
And he seems like such a loving man for his family, toward Dolly and his son. A lot of men would have hated this spit up baby. You know, but
especially because he's not
joy.
around the baby, you know what I mean? You think about it, like, he's been gone all this time. He hasn't been accustomed to this, you know. Even women, when they're not necessarily used to babies, getting all spit up, like your initial reaction is like, okay, gonna hand it off. But he knows, this is my son, this is my child, I love him with my entire heart. I get to be here for one night, you know. I'm gonna hold him as long as I can.
And who knows if I'm gonna make it back either. So you know, this might be the only time I hold him. And the thing is too, he's so, and it's also, I kind of feel like this family and this son, it's like kind of giving him inspiration. You know, it gives him inspiration to continue this fight, you know, because if they, you know, Britain was under a heavy attack at this time. They were under the Blitz, you know, at this time. And so, you know, like they were if they would have succumbed, they would have been like speaking German and been taken over too. Like gives them, this family is something for him to fight for. And that's what you get this impression of. Then you get this bit. It was cold in the room and she hugged herself. She was wearing nothing but Jerry's string vest. He thought she looked erotic in it. Lewd, he said, approving. His Highland accent making the words sound really dirty. And the thought made her smile. The thin cottons clung to her breast true enough, and her nipples poked out something scandalous, if only from the chill. So Mary, I don't know if you saw the picture I posted of this.
I did.
So Mary, one of the many sides of Roger that we love in the Beehive, and we love to joke about, is Kinky Roger. Okay, that's what we call him, Kinky Roger. And here we see that apple did not fall far from the tree, right?
I love it. I love it.
So, I mean, it looked like a fishnet teddy. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So it's very like Roger could touch
little holes.
Rogers, it was kind of like a World War II version of a teddy, wartime lingerie. That's what it is.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
So it totally reminded me of Roger. I'm like, okay, he gets that from Dad.
Yep.
So I loved it. And then we get this last little poignant bit. I loved it. Kiki Roger. We get this little poignant bit. She wanted to go in and crawl next to him, longing for his warmth, longing to keep touching him for as long as they had. He need to go at 8, catch the train back, but it would barely be light by then. But she doesn't move. And she felt as though she denied herself her desire, offered that denial as a sacrifice. It would strengthen the magic. It would help to keep him safe and bring him back. God knew what a minister would say to that little bit of superstition. and her tingling mouth twisted in self-mockery and doubt. Still she sat in the dark,
Yeah.
waiting for the cold blue light of the dawn that would take him. So thoughts on Marjorie here, Mary, her desperation and her love, her willingness to try to make a trade for his safety, give up some pleasure now to safeguard her husband's return. What was your take on all that?
Well, it's so funny because it brings all these inklings back to like the Scottish superstition and like, you know, adding those little bits of magic and putting it out there, you know, maybe if I do this little heart and all these different things, and if I don't get back into bed with
She's
him right
trying
now,
every little thing, yeah.
everything, and just out of sheer love and sheer hope, and you know, you could envision that. And I loved reading how young he was, that he's only 22, because at first when I'm reading it, I'm thinking it's Roger's dad, I'm thinking about Frank as we got to see him portrayed in the show, and I was picturing Jerry much older than what he was, and there
Right.
she is saying he's 22, and you're just, you know, it's this still very young love, you know, they're a brand new couple, they've got a brand new baby, and all they want to do is be like rabbits between those sheets. I mean, hey, she's got like a raw face with Ramon, that beard and stubble, you know. I was thinking about it and laughing, and it's like, yeah, if your face isn't used to it, you become like almost a rash looking person the whole next day. And
she didn't care. She loved it, you know. Yeah,
exactly. The love that they have for each other is beautiful, and it's just that innocent love.
Yep. The Kinks, the Mackenzie men. I'm reading some of the thing. I
love it.
So I said small gestures in this story show how Frank, Jerry, and now Dolly feel about their spouses. You know, Dolly's little heart encircled Jay with her superstitions about keeping him safe. And they do seem very in love here, you know. It's such a time of stress and strife around them, you know. And you know, in London during the blackout, it's probably scary then to be left alone with an infant. So Dolly's really very brave here, just even trying to survive all this on her own. I mean, he hasn't been around for a year, you know, that this is the first he's seen. So it's really got to be tough for her, you know, in this situation. So her thoughts get interrupted by crying baby Roger, hashtag parent life, right? And Dolly rushes to him before his house will wake up Jerry. It trips on a chair, crashing with a bang, which causes Jerry to spring awake with a loud curse and Roger to start crying. And Jerry, I think he likely had like a little bit of PTSD when the bang woke him up, because you see that again later.
The way that was written, exactly.
He kind of like does a jump, and then you see he relieves this tense situation with like innuendo and laughter to follow it up, you know. And it says a lot about his character that he does it, that he tries to protect Dolly from it, from learning about the horrors that he's seen in war by trying to cover it up with humor. And also you see his Mackenzie charm, you know, come through, because the Mackenzies are charming. And, you know, this noise has the next door neighbor, Mrs. Munn, in the next flat, bang on the wall indignantly. And Jerry's king of his domain, you know, like Roger, he springs into action, and his naked, it says, as Jerry's naked shape crossed the room in a bound, he pounded furiously on the partition with his fist, making the wall board quiver and boom like a drum. He paused, fist still raised, waiting, and Roger had stopped screeching and pressed with the racket. Did you know how babies do that? They're crying, and all
be louder than me.
I know exactly what they're talking about. Yes. And making the wallboard quiver. Okay, so Roger stopped screeching and pressed by the racket, dead silence from the other side of the wall, and Marjorie pressed her mouth against Roger's little round head to muffle her giggling. He smelled of baby scent and fresh pee, and she cuddled him like a large hot water bottle. Jerry gave a satisfied grunt and came across to her. Ha! He said, and kissed her. What do you think you are? She whispered, leaning into him. A gorilla? Yeah, he taking her hand and pressing it against him. You want to see my banana? Which I thought was so cute.
Yes.
So definitely very, very Roger-like. I could see him saying that. So hopefully they get another quickie in before he has to go.
Oh, I hope so too.
I hope so
Especially
too.
with the banana.
So he knows what to do with the banana, right?
Yes.
And you see the Mac Temper protector. It's very poignant in that scene. Their last time together before he disappears. And I love seeing how much Dolly and Jerry love each other, and they both love Roger. It's all very sweet. Love the humor. So your Mary, thoughts on this scene, Jerry and Marjorie? What stuck out to you about this section, and what did you sense about their relationship?
I mean, first off, I just got to mention that that baby had pipes. We knew that Roger was going to be a singer, being able to cry the way that he did. You know, I just love that. That's what I joke about. For, you know, both of my kids are very loud, and when they were babies
Right.
and they used to scream, my son was just extremely loud, and my daughter had a very high pitch. And I just would tell babysitters, bystanders, whoever, my son had colic, so he just screamed all the time. I was just like, they're going to be rock stars one day, or opera singers. Like, it's really okay. They have great pipes, and they're just practicing right now. You know, it's what you kind of tell yourself. But that stood out to me in a cute little Roger way. But in
Yep.
regards to their love, you know,
They're all putting the
even
banana
though,
emojis down on the chat board. The
yes,
banana
oh, I
emoji.
love it. I love it. You know, to me, that was so special because, like, even though this could be this is very bittersweet. You know what I mean? Like, he has got
Mhm.
to leave very soon, and we don't know if he's coming back. Most likely isn't coming back. And yet he's still able to make those jokes. You know, just jumps out of bed, bangs back on that wall. I just loved seeing this protectiveness of this young family. You know, he doesn't get really, he's thrown off for a second from the baby cry, but it wasn't the baby crying. I agree with you. I took it as more of the PTSD from being in war. It wasn't like, ooh, why is that baby crying? You know, he just
No, I think
woke
it
up
was the
from it.
chair banging on the
Oh,
floor. The
yes,
chair, because
yes.
she knocked the chair down.
The
It was like
bang. That's what it
bang.
was. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, like, I liked that, you know, even though he hasn't been around a baby, he hasn't been in this family environment, that his initial instinct when he woke up was to care for the family, you know, not to complain like, shut that baby up or anything. No, it was, you know, him being a really good dad and being a good husband.
Yeah, I see somebody on the board asking if they're ever told how Claire and Frank met. They met through her Uncle Lamb. Frank was consulting with Uncle Lamb to do research, and met Claire that way. So just so you know, on the board, I am watching. I just can't stop it too much, but I'm watching it, and I'll come back and comment a lot when I get done. So I said the scene shows a very young couple who's very much in
Mm-hmm.
love, who want to protect each other, you know,
Yes.
and we learn a lot about them in these just this little few short paragraphs. You can feel the connection between them,
Mm-hmm.
and people had to grow up fast in that time period. You
Yeah.
know, Jerry's only 22. He's already married with a
Mm-hmm.
baby, putting his life in danger on a daily
Multiple
basis,
times. Yeah.
not
Mm-hmm.
multiple times, and you know, flying aircraft, not knowing if they're going to, you know, basically daily going up and doing
Yeah.
runs or doing whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
and basically neither of them knowing, because she's in the midst of the blitz, the bomb, the London's being bombed
Mm-hmm.
constantly at this time, and they don't even know if either one of them is going to survive to see peacetime. So
Yes.
it's a very, like, you got to take every moment and live it to its
Yep.
fullest that you have,
Mm-hmm.
and you get that sense from them, you know. So I kind
Yes.
of love that. um Come on, light, don't go out on me. Stay.
Stay light. Stay.
Stay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so scene 5, Jerry and Frank. Jerry reports to Frank and is greeted in Polish, letting him know basically where he's going with this weed test that Frank puts out to
Mm-hmm.
him. He greets him in Polish. And again, notice the subtleties we see in Frank here from this
Yeah.
new perspective of him. So I had another clip, but I'm going to read it because uh, I don't want to trust my Audible. So he greets him, Dizen Dobry or whatever, and Jerry halted in the act of lowering himself in the chair and stared at a smiling Frank Randall. Oh, I like that, is it? Niche, blah, 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 blah. It
Mm-hmm.
meant F off, sir, in formal Polish. One thing I can do is bleep out the F words if I read it, so that's good.
There you go.
And former Polish, and Randall, taken by surprise, broke out laughing.
Love
Like
that.
that, he agreed. And he had a wad of papers with him, official forms, all sorts, the bump, as the pilots call it. Jerry recognized the one you signed that named who your pension went to, and the one about what to do with your body if there was one, and anyone had time to bother with it. He'd done all that he had done all that when he signed up, but they made you do it again if you went out on special service. He ignored the forms, though, eyes fixed instead on the maps that Randall had brought. And here's me thinking that you and Milan picked me for my bonny face, he drawled, exaggerating his accent, and he leaned back, affecting casualness. It is Poland, then. So it had not been a coincidence after all. or only the coincidence of Dolly's mishap sending him into the building early. In a way, that was comforting. It wasn't the bloody hand of fate tapping him on the shoulder by puncturing the fuel line. The hand of fate had been in it a good bit earlier, putting him in green flight with Andrzej Kalidowicz. And this is where we find out that he had become friends with this Polish pilot who had taught him rudimentary Polish.
Yeah.
And that friend had crashed and died a month ago. Again, it's a little reminder of the fragility of all of these pilots.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That left him the only one in the squadron that could speak Polish. So that's why he was singled out. Do you think that's the only reason he was picked?
I would like to think that it's also because of him being an extraordinary pilot, that he is very, he's intelligent. We're able to really, it's part of that, what we pick up on as confidence in the beginning of the reading, but also, for Frank to sign off on him and for Frank to be able to laugh with him. I see Frank as having a really high caliber of people. Like, if you're going to be with me, and you need to be of my level of intelligence, a higher level of intelligence. So I took it not only that he could speak Polish, but also of his high caliber in regards to his intelligence.
I think also he has proven himself in sticky situations to be able, like the last time, most men probably would have died in that situation.
Yes.
But he rode that out and he managed to survive, And also, we learn in another scene or two his maneuverability, his ability to maneuver in the skies. And so I'm thinking that Milan probably knows his pilots, and he probably said, look, he was best friends with this guy that spoke Polish. He taught him some stuff, so he does know a little bit of Polish, and he's probably one of my better pilots. Yes. So this is what I think. I think it was a combination of the two, not just because he spoke Polish. I personally think that. I want to believe that.
Me too.
Because I defend my boy,
That's it.
So the foreboding sense is loaded in that first part in three ways. First, it's Poland. Okay, so like right away, oh gosh, this is where all concentration camps are. Yeah, not great, Bob. And then second, all the papers there of what to do with your body, what to do with your pension. It's
that
like
they have to
they're making you redo
right now.
it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's telling you like there's a high chance you're not coming home from this, And
if there was a soundtrack right now, it wouldn't sound that good. Bear McCreary would not be writing uplifting music
it'd
to
be
this
like,
portion.
Yeah. And third, us getting that story about his friend that crashed just a month ago,
For the fragility
and how
of life.
He crashed. It's like another thing to show you the fragility of this situation. So you basically are getting like these three little foreboding signs, and coming into this. So he says, Poland, Randall agreed. Milan says you can carry on a conversation in Polish. Is that true? I can order a drink, start a fight, or ask directions. Is any of that of use? Well, the last one might be, Randall said, very dry. But we'll hope it doesn't come to that. The MI6 agent had pushed aside the forms, unrolled the maps. Despite himself, Jerry leaned forward, drawn as by a magnet. They were official maps, but with the markings made by hand, circles and X's. It's like this, Randall said, flattening the maps with both hands. The Nazis have had labor camps in Poland for the last 2 years, but it's not common knowledge among the public, either home or abroad. It would be very helpful to the war effort if it were common knowledge, not just the camp's existence, but the kind of thing that goes on there. A shadow crossed the lean, dark face. Anger, Jerry thought, intrigued. Apparently, Mr. MI6 knew exactly what kind of thing went on there, and he wondered how. If we want it widely known and widely talked about, and we do, we need documentary evidence, Randall said very matter-of-factly. Photographs. There'd be 4 of them, he said, 4 Spitfire pilots, a flight, but they wouldn't fly together. Each one of them would have a specific target, a geographically separate target, but all would be hit on the same day. The camps are guarded, but not with anti-aircraft ordnance. There are towers, though, machine guns. And Jerry didn't need telling that a machine gun was just as effective in someone's hands as it was from an enemy plane. To take the sort of pictures Randall wanted, would mean coming in low enough to risk being shot from the towers. His only advantage would be the benefit of surprise. The guards might spot him, but they wouldn't be expecting him to come diving out of the sky for a low pass just above the camp. Don't drive for more than one pass unless the cameras malfunction. Better to have fewer pictures than none at all. Yes, sir. He reverted to sir as Group Captain Milan was present at the meeting, silent but listening intently. Got to keep up appearances. Here is the list of targets you'll practice on in Northumberland. Get as close as you think reasonable without risking. Randall's face did change at that, breaking into a wry smile. Get as close as you can manage with a chance of coming back, all right? The cameras may be worth even more than you are. And that gave a faint chuckle
Thanks,
from
buddy.
Milan. Pilots, especially trained pilots, were valuable, and the RAF had plenty of planes now, but nowhere near enough pilots to fly them. He'd be taught to use the wing cameras to unload the film safely. If he was shot down but still alive and the plane didn't burn, he was to get the film out and try to get back over the border. Hence the Polish. Randall ran a hand through his hair and gave Jerry a crooked smile. If you have to walk out, you may need to ask directions. That they had 2 Polish-speaking pilots, he said, 1 Pole and 1 Hungarian who had volunteered, and an Englishman with a few words of the language like Jerry. And it is a volunteer mission. Let me reiterate that. Aye, I know, Jerry said irritably. I said I'd go, didn't I, sir? You did, Randall said, and looked at him for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable, and then lowered his gaze to the maps again. Thanks, he said softly. So, I know, right? It's
Laying it all down.
What are your thoughts on these 2 men, and what did you notice from this scene? Did you sense that this was a very low survival probability, and what thoughts did it leave you with about each man? Did it give you a different perspective of Frank?
I have a pretty.
Bunch of things at you at once.
I know. I think I already have a pretty high perspective of Frank.
Okay.
But to see him do this and to treat Jerry with such respect, because I see Frank as such, the fact that Jerry has to change what he calls Frank when other people are around shows you realistically in this grand scheme of the ranks that everybody would be at, how much higher Frank would be, and yet really how just candid he's being with Jerry about everything is, I don't know, it's just it continues to elevate how I think of Jerry. Honestly, it really continues to help me say, like, okay, this is a very capable man. I liked that Jerry was interested, even though this is scary as all heck. He's sitting there thinking like, oh, I don't even want to know.
The map.
Yes, he doesn't want to know necessarily how Frank knows everything, because he's right there saying like he's seen things, he has done things, but here he is knowing that this could be my goodbye in life, and yet I'm gonna lean in, and I don't need to deal with the paperwork. I want to see what's going on. I want to learn more about this. I just thought that was right. I loved the drawn as by a magnet. Like, he's an interested, inquisitive young man, which is really cool.
Yeah, and so like the odds of this mission being successful are very low, and they both know this.
Yeah.
And once again, it's really astounding when you look at the bravery of these pilots who risk themselves in this way, in knowing the dangers that they were going into and the chance of dying. And it's hard to believe sometimes, like Jerry's only 22 years old, like you said.
Exactly.
But I think, they had to grow up fast in this environment. My son's 21, and I'm thinking, like, this is nuts, like, my son would be so gone in this situation. He would not be up to this task.
We're like, no thanks.
And I love my son dearly, but my son would be like, can I? No, I could just say he would definitely not be up for this. Like, so back then, 21-year-old kids, like 21, 22-year-old people are like, they had to grow up fast. It's kind of like we see in Outlander world, everybody kind of has to grow up fast. And Frank, a lot of people get this impression about Frank that he was just like this desk jockey guy in the war, and he really was not. Okay, no. He was, and some of the clues that Diana has woven into the story that we regularly read is some things like when he was at the Stones with Claire. And Claire was like noticing how stealthily he went around how stealthily he was, how he moved in a stealthy way.
Yeah.
And she's like, looked at him like, wow, look at the way he's being,
Mm-hmm.
And it was like something different side of him she wasn't used to seeing. And all of these
Yes.
types of things. Now, Diana confirms that he had done mission work, that he had run agents, and he was their point person, like people that were secret agents in the field, and
Yes.
he would go into different countries and meet with them right over the borders and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So he was always like kind of in the field a lot of
Yes,
times.
in danger, yeah.
Yes, and also when you get the Dearest Deadeye letter, it talks about how he's identifying these threats to Bree, and he will neutralize them. So he
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
not like Mr.,
No.
whatever, like these,
He's not sitting at
mushy mushy. He's
HR
not
like,
a mush pot. Yeah. Yeah.
No.
And a lot of
He's a
people
mover
think
and
that.
shaker. Yeah.
Yes. Because they think of him as a professor. And another thing Diana says, I have all these Diana deets for our AfterBuzz, but one of the things that she says is they actively recruited people that were professors
Yeah.
to work in intelligence. You know what I mean? Because they were
Yeah.
used to pouring through research, pouring over materials. And she said it's very probable that Frank was involved in spy work before he even met Claire, much less
Yeah.
married her. So it was very possible he was already in that work
Yep.
before they even met or married.
So
She's just
cool.
clueless to the whole thing. So it's
Yeah.
really going to be interesting as we find out more. So it's really great to see other perspectives of Frank in this story, other than Claire and Bree, and we get it. And it's the most detailed account of any of his activities during the wars found in this story. It recontextualizes him a little bit, and like I said, we'll talk about that more in the AfterBuzz. I got chills too when Jerry is asked to sign the papers. They were up against such a terrible, brutal force, and they had to give all they had, and they had to basically beat this force before it took them over.
Yes.
So there was no holding back by these people. They would die, they would try or die trying, So when he signed those papers, Jerry knew there's high probability he wouldn't return from this mission, and Frank knew it too, and you could see it pained him, toward the end there. And it kind of gives you the idea of Frank had to do this constantly, send these people out on these suicidal type missions.
Yes.
When knowing they have a young wife and a child and all these things at home, and had to have the weight of it, and then never could talk about it. He could never share this with Claire. He could never tell her anything. And so he had to just keep it inside constantly. And that's very wearing on a person. You know what I mean? So it really kind of gives you a more sympathy. Yes, he needs all the co-pays.
That's it.
So scene 6, Jerry's on maneuvers, and this is when he goes down. And so it's interesting in this section, you see Jerry in action. We see his expertise for one so young. We get to really see his action and expertise in this scene. Yep. And Jerry's on training maneuvers on a damp Northumberland day. And he signals, he turns up the throttle, the plane begins to move. It says he touched his pocket automatically, whispering, "Love you, Dolly," under his breath. It says everyone had their little rituals. Those last few moments before takeoff, for Jerry Mackenzie, it was his wife's face and his lucky stone that usually settled the worms in his belly. She'd found it on a rocky hill on the Isle of Lewis, where they'd spent their brief honeymoon. A rough sapphire, she said, very rare. Like you, he said, and kissed her. And no need for worms just now, but it wasn't a ritual if you only did it sometimes, was it? Well, actually, yeah, it actually was a need for worms, because you're about to go down, Mr. Jerry,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there is some significance here with that little bit that I just read. So do you have any thoughts on that little bit that he has, like this little ritual that he does? You also
I love it.
Kind of.
Yeah, it continues once again with all these little like Scottish rituals. I'm not someone who has rituals. I mean, maybe if like I was really, I'm not. Blake will do little things, but I think just the cultural heritage that both he and Dolly have come from, having these kind of little things that even if they've made them up on their own, even if it is something as simple as touching that stone in your pocket and thinking of your wife, that's something that he has ingrained in him. And it makes sense to this is something that pilots would do. It's something that I know Blake tells me with baseball, like as people go on up to the plate, they have their own little ritual and they kind of like muck around with their hands or kick their boots or whatever. So it's something that I don't do, but I like reading about people who do it. And of course, it just got me so excited with the RAF Spitfire.
And yes, it's interesting because Rocky Hill on Lewis, okay, the Isle of Lewis is where the Killanish stones are. You know, the Killanish stone that you always see, the Killanish stones.
Yes, yes.
Pictures of that. Okay, so that's actually on the Isle of Lewis. So when she talks about a rocky hill on the island, you kind of start immediately thinking of that.
It, yes.
And then blue sapphire, we have several in our story, you know, in our stories, you know, in Outlander.
Yeah.
People with blue sapphires. That's like a common thing. We have Claire has one in her little pouch of rough blue sapphire. We have Lord John has one in his ring. We have, you know, several of them through this story. So it kind of is a repetitive thing, like kind of a signal of a time traveler, you know. Hello, Lumos.
Someone came to visit.
If you don't know, that's Miriam Blake's cat Lumos,
who just loves being on camera. Always shows up when we're doing things.
Yes, hello. She's like, I want some attention.
That's it.
So he wishes he could have flown Dolly too, and with its familiar feel and dent where he slams his fist when he gets a kill and all of this, but the plane has already been modified with the wing cameras and the night sights, and so he made it his own, he said, by painting a Dolly on the nose. So he begins to mentally go through 10 rules for air fighting, which is a poster that Jerry knows by heart. And so as he's mentally going through each rule, he realizes that none of them are going to be a help in this mission.
It doesn't actually work in this situation.
Yes. He's like, never fly straight and level for more than 30 seconds in the combat area. And then he's like, straight and level is just what I had to do to accomplish this task. When diving to attack, always leave a proportion of your formation above to act as a guard. He would be alone.
Nobody there.
This is irrelevant. And so he goes through all of these things, and all these rules of flying, nothing applies to him, which was kind of killing to see him go through these commandments and counting off all the ways that this special mission would force him to go against these rules that are, you know, to help you come out alive from air travel.
Doesn't work.
You know, this doesn't apply. This doesn't apply. And so it really shows that Jerry's commitment to duty, knowing how slim his chances are. He's going through all these thinking, none of this is going to work for me, and all this is supposed to be designed to get me out of here alive, and none of this works for me. So it was, and so he goes up in the, what did you think? Did that strike you, that all of these, like them reading these rules and none of them applying for him in this situation, and him going through how none of it's going to apply?
So much of the military basics, you know, it's things that are drilled inside of them. It's just the order. Things become just routine inside their minds. My mom was in the Navy for most of my life. So, you know, growing up in a military house, you kind of just get to know that, and you get to understand that that's also something that gives them peace. You know, it's like, all right, in times of stress and everything, you getting a little present.
Yes, I wasn't expecting coffee to be delivered when my husband incapacitated, and my son did it. Isn't that nice? See, he can bring me coffee. I wouldn't expect him to fly in a plane, but he brings coffee.
I love it. And
you're
perfect. Exactly. I love it. Oh my gosh. You'll have to tell him later.
Go ahead, continue.
Oh no, but I was just saying, you know, my mom would often tell me how, you know, just having kind of that routine actually gave you a sense of, like, you felt calm. You felt calm and relieved. Like, okay, I know to do these things, and these things have kept me safe so far, so I'm going to continue to do these things, you know. And for him to have to be sitting there doing his routine and saying, well, that won't work, and that won't work, and that won't work, you're feeling very anxious for Jerry in this moment.
Yes, I was very nervous for him.
Yes.
So Jerry's ending his day. He hasn't eaten. This is important. He hasn't eaten since dawn.
Yep.
You know, he's been out flying all day.
Hungry
and
boy.
Now it's tea time. And he's ending the day flying. He feels like he's been casting concrete. His shoulder blades are all tensed up. He's been practicing since dawn. He's hungry. He hunches his shoulders, groaning, and then resumes his sector by sector scan. You get this idea of what he does religiously. And so it says Dolly had given him a white scarf as a parting present. He didn't know how she managed the money for it, and she wouldn't let him ask. She just settled it around his neck inside his flight jacket. Somebody had told her that the Spitfires were all wore them and to save the constant collar chafing, and she meant him to have one.
So
it
cute.
felt nice. He'd admit that. made him think of her touch when she put it on him. He pushed the thought hastily aside. The last thing he could afford to do was to start thinking about his wife if he ever hoped to get back to her. And he did mean to get back to her.
Yeah.
So you notice all the ways Diana weaves their connection and relationship in here, Mary. Even though they only have one little scene together that we saw, she's constantly like weaving in thoughts of his, like bringing in ideas and giving you backstories and different things, that interactions, like what they did on their honeymoon, the rock. And she gave him this now with the scarf. So it's like she's always constantly building this relationship. Yes. Which I think was clever of her, So he goes through his training maneuvers. His face is chilled as well, and he's cold, and he wonders if he's going to be picking up ice if it gets too high. He dodges around with this fellow pilot that's Polish. This is one of the other people, the one that he said was Polish, that's going assigned to the mission. And we see Jerry's mad flying skills, impressing the other guy, and they run each other, and Jerry says he will teach him the maneuver over a drink later, one that they never get to have, And so the other pilot has a familiar name, Paul Riccozzi. And I said, did you notice that, Mary?
Oh, I
What
did.
are your thoughts about that?
I put in my book, same name? What the heck? As I'm reading it. I'm like, this cannot be just, there are millions and trillions of names. Diana would not put this name in here if it wasn't
and it was very
meant
shortly
to be.
after she wrote the other story. This is only a couple years after she wrote that story. And last we saw, they were going to the future.
Yeah, and he knows that there's some standing stones nearby, I think.
Here's what she says. Diana Deet, she said she's had a few different little bits of shade on this whole mention of this name.
Oh, okay.
She said, no, the name Riccozzi isn't necessarily a coincidence. She puts a little grin. She says neither is Kalidowitz, who was the guy that he learned Polish from. He was a real guy. So she's saying, but she says, but whether anything's going to come of that, or whether it's just a small inside joke, remains to be seen. Then she also said that it's very likely a descendant of some sort, but not Riccozzi himself from space. And then she said, but whether that has any meaning or impact on the story, we'll see. We shall see. Now, I have a little wag that it could be.
Okay.
That it could be, now this is a real wag, total guess,
This is a far, yeah.
Totally out there guess. Could it be that he's the descendant from Madeline and the Comte, and he ends up becoming Gayless's dad, this guy?
I mean,
because the timing would work out, because if he was like in that area practicing and doing stuff, and then he like hooked up with the mom, this guy that's the the descendant, and then he left her pregnant, took off or whatever, and that baby could be Gayless. Gayless is, whatever she is, 20 in 1960 or whatever. So it kind of works out that she would be born or pregnant at that time. This could be
a
her
wicked
dad.
wild wag. Yes.
Yeah, maybe. Just throwing it out there.
Look at you.
Well, I'm trying to fit it in, but it could be nothing. It could just be her throwing like, making us all go nuts, and making our brains explode.
As she does.
She likes to do that, yes. So we also find out that Jerry is left-handed in this little section. And this is interesting because Roger isn't left-handed, but both of Jem's grandfathers, are left-handed. Now we find out that Jerry is, because Jerry's his grandfather. So both of those people are left-handed, and so is Jem. So we always just assumed he got it from Jamie, but it could be that he actually has two in his upline. So it's kind of interesting. So the cameras become an issue, which, like, geez, that's kind of ticked me off. Like, these cameras, you're depending on everything with these cameras, It
was like us with Facebook. It was like us with our modern technology. And this is Jerry getting upset with his technology.
1 out of 3 times, they malfunction. You can't do better than that. Navy or pilot people, Air Force, whatever you are, RAF. You can't make the thing work better. You got him on this mission that he's practically going to barely make it out alive.
Exactly.
Make the cameras work, for God's sake. Anyway. So this is, but they had to refit it for his left-handedness. So this is why he has extra time today.
Mm-hmm.
So he finds his target, Hadrian's Wall, Mile Castle 37. And I also had a clip to play here, but I'm going to read it because, okay. Okay, Mile Castle 37. Okay. A stone rectangle attached to Hadrian's Wall like a snail on a leaf. The old Roman legions had made these small, neat forts to house the garrisons that guarded the wall. Nothing left now but the outline of the foundation, but it made a good target. He circled once, calculating, then dived and roared over it at an altitude of maybe 50 feet, clamorous clunking like an army of stampeding robots. He pulled up sharp and haired off, circling high and fast, pulling out to run for the imagined border, circling up again, and all the time his heart thumped and the sweat ran down his sides, imagining what it would be when the real day came. Mid-afternoon it would be, like this. The winter light just going, but still enough to see clearly. He'd circle and find an angle that would let him cross the whole camp, and please God, one that would let him come out of the sun, and then he'd go in. One pass, Randall said. Don't risk more than once unless the cameras malfunction. The bloody things did malfunction roughly every third pass, but the buttons were slippery under his fingers. Sometimes they worked on the next try, sometimes they didn't. If they didn't work on the first pass over the camp, or didn't work often enough, he'd have to try again. Nietzsche the slag, he muttered, F the devil, and pressed the buttons again. 1, 2, 1, 2. Gentle but firm, like you do to a lady's privates, the boffin had told him, illustrating the brisk twiddle. He never thought of doing that. Would Dolly like that? He wondered. I love it.
Yeah.
And where exactly did you do it? Well, a woman did come with a button. Maybe that was it. But then 2 fingers, clunk, 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 crunch. He reverted to English profanity and smashed both buttons with his fist. One camera answered with a startled clunk, and the other one was silent. He poked both buttons again, and again, no effect. Bloody effing arse buggering, he thought vaguely, and then he thought he'd have to stop swearing once this was over, and he was home again. Bad example for the lad. F, he bellowed. And ripping the strap free of his leg, he picked up the box, hammered it on the edge of the seat, slammed it back onto his thigh, visibly dented. He saw with grim satisfaction, pressed the bulky button. Clunk. The camera answered meekly. Aye, well then, you just remember that, he said. Puffing in righteous indignation, gave the buttons a good jabbing. I love it.
So good. So good.
How much do you love that bit? Both Frank's button education.
Yep. Exactly.
Trip. Because yeah, he always says that, that's one thing that's always said about Frank was he was a skilled lover. Like he had a lot of skill as a lover and knew what to touch and how to touch and all that stuff. And yeah, knew what to do. And so I love that, that Frank told him, do it like you do a lady, when you touch your private parts. And he's sitting there thinking, how am I going I don't know about that. And it really gives you, you see echoes again of Roger here. You also realize how young he is.
Exactly.
How inexperienced he is.
Yep.
His thoughts of Dolly and the buttons were funny, but it's also making you realize, he hasn't hardly lived a life. And got to have a lot of sex and got to experience different things, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And he's in the middle of learning new things about his plane. He's worried about the cameras, but he still has time to speculate about Dolly's buttons.
I love it.
I love Diana's sense of humor with that,
Exactly.
One thing that strikes you here too is Jerry's expertise. Here he is in a plane. He's trying to get to learn it. He's learning how to maneuver through combat, how to operate cameras that don't work. And I like the way he kind of solves it the old-fashioned way by pounding on it, the thing. And so what did your thoughts on this section before the crap hits the fan, Mary?
I mean, once again, just Jerry's humor with all of this just made me laugh so very much as I was reading it, you know, because once again, I could see him just being like, I'm just going to keep playing with this. And then, like you said, his youth, you know, you think about being 22 years old. A lot of us were still in college, finishing up college at that age, and we know what college kids are doing and what they're thinking about at least half the time, particularly the gentlemen in those age ranges. You know, it's the time where lots of people just want to be thinking about sex all the time, and so it makes sense that 22-year-old Jerry, as he's doing these moves that may cause him one day to die, you know, as he's playing with this camera device that lost him some of his guns, his mind's going not only to Dolly, but also the things he wants to try with Dolly. And I just thought it was so funny that that's where his brain's
what
going.
What is he talking about? Yeah, what he's like you do. He's like, what do you do? Where's the button?
Have to ask Frank
Two
later.
fingers?
Yes. Now that would have been a conversation
if I make it out,
he's
going to tell me exactly what that's all about.
Exactly.
So cute. So he hadn't been paying attention during his temper tantrum, been circling upward, and he starts back down for a fresh pass, and all of a sudden he starts to hear a knocking sound in his engine. No, he says, and gives it more throttle. The knocking got louder. He could feel it vibrating through the fuselage. And then with a loud clang, the engine compartment right by his knee, and with horror he saw tiny drops of oil splatter on the perspex in front of his face. The engine had stopped. Bloody. He was too busy to find another word. His lovely, agile fighter had suddenly become a very clumsy glider. He was going down, and the only question was if he'd find a relatively flat spot to crash in. His hand groped automatically through the landing gear, but then drew back. No time, belly landing. Where was the bottom? Jesus, he had been distracted. He hadn't seen that solid bank of cloud move in. It must have come faster than he thought. Splittered through his mind, too fast for words. He glanced at the altimeter, but what it told him was of limited use because he didn't know what the ground under him was like. Was it crags, flat meadow, water? He hoped and prayed for a road, a grassy flat spot, anything short of God. He was at 500 feet and still in cloud. Christ! The ground appeared in a sudden burst of yellow and brown. He jerked the nose up, saw the rocks of a crag dead ahead, swerved, stalled, nosedive, pulled back, not enough. Oh, God. So it's like, oh my gosh,
that writing, it's like a snowball with how she wrote it, where you're right there with him, like, oh my gosh, it's in the clouds. I don't know what it's gonna be. I loved how she wrote that bit.
Yes, you're like totally like, oh my gosh, So Jerry's first conscious thought, section 7, is that he should have radioed base when the engine went. He remembers one of the 10 rules: make your decisions promptly. He's angry with himself. Do you think he even had time to radio base? No, I don't think so either. He's being too hard on yourself, Jerry. Exactly. I think you damn did good surviving, like survival was good.
Yeah. You were in a plane in the high air and somehow
with
you survived.
Engine, just sliding down. Yes. So he's lying on his side in the grass. It figures he was thrown from the plane. His head hurts, his knee hurts, even worse. It's hard for him to think through the pain. It's nearly dark, and the mist surrounds him, and he smells rot and old mangel-wurzels, which I looked up, which is a beet used for cattle, apparently.
Okay.
But he doesn't smell petrol or burning fuselage. And so he figures it's a good sign the plane hadn't caught on fire. The radio might still be working. He staggers to his feet. He has a sudden attack of dizziness. He sees nothing but the mist, and in the left behind, but to the right he can make out 3 large bulky shapes, the remnants of a stone circle. So I have
dun dun dun
dun dun dun. We're like, oh no, walk away, Jerry, walk away. Turn, Jerry, turn. So he makes his way slowly across the lumpy ground. He found that they were stones, remnants of one of those prehistoric sites that littered the ground in northern Britain. Only 3 of the big stones were still standing, but he could see a few more fallen or pushed over, lying like bodies in the darkening fog. He paused to vomit, holding on to one of the stones. Christ, his head was like to split, and he had a terrible buzzing in his ears. He pawed vaguely at his ear, thinking somehow he'd left his headset on, but nothing but cold, wet ear. He closed his eyes again, breathing hard, and leaned against a stone for support. The static in his ears was getting worse, accompanied by a sort of whine. Had he burst an eardrum? He forced himself to open his eyes and was rewarded with the sight of a large, dark, irregular shape well beyond the remains of the stone circle. Dolly! The plane was barely visible, fading into the swirling dark, but that's what it had to be. Mostly intact, it looked like. Although very much nose down with her tail in the air, she must have plowed into the earth. He staggered on the rock-strewn ground, feeling the vertigo set in again with a vengeance. He waved his arms, trying to keep balance, but his head had spun, and Christ, the bloody noise in his head. He couldn't think. Oh, Jesus, he felt as if his bones were dissolved. Stop there.
Right. We know this.
So, yes. So it had a very atmospheric quality to that scene, with the mist and the stones and the silhouette of this plane, as well as the disorientation from the crash, buzzing of the stones. So Mary, did this experience, what are your thoughts? Did this experience give you any more insights on time travel? With the sensation or the facts here, did you think he started going as he saw the plane and then just hit the right spot in the circle? Or did you think he was going and then as he was going, he saw the plane kind of fading away? Like, how did you read that?
I didn't know if he actually saw the plane or if it was something else, or if it was part of the stone circle and his eyes were just playing tricks on him because he was so disoriented. Okay, then I think
he saw the plane.
Yeah. I thought he was making it up because I was like, buddy, no.
But it was on the other side of the stone circle, so he was like working through the stone circle to get to it.
Okay, yeah.
But it says it was like fading in the mist, and I got the impression he was starting to go, and that's why it looked like the plane was fading away in the mist as he was going. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's the impression I got.
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of like Claire's describing, you know, going through the stones for the first time and the way that it affects your body. Yeah. So that's what it just, for me, it kept bringing that back and just being completely disoriented.
Because this is the one account other than Claire's first travel that we're getting of a person like that we actually see them travel. Like Buck, we learned, but Buck was already, like, we didn't see him actually in the traveling, you know?
Yeah.
So this is the first time other than Claire that we see somebody accidentally getting caught up in it. You know what I mean? Like everyone else planned to go, you know?
Yes.
So, yeah. I said he's still in his own time, I think, when he feels like he's dissolving at the end of the section, and then the time travel takes place. And I think he's still in his own time. He's walking through the stones, and I think he must have just hit the right spot, maybe because some of the stones were knocked down. And he starts, the buzzing in his head is very consistent with Claire and everybody else. And then he sees the plane starting to fade, but it's there, you know, in the mist.
Yes.
So I kind of get the impression like he's starting to travel, but he's seeing the plane, but it's getting worse. And that's because he's traveling,
that's
you know?
Really, okay, that makes more sense.
So section 8, it's full dark. He comes to himself. He wakes feeling really achy. His knee is stiff. There's a 3/4 moon. It's full dark out. And he looks around his surroundings, and he sees the plane. He looks for the plane, the radio. He remembers all this, starts to come back to him what he was trying to do, and looks, and it's not there. So I have this next little bit. He stares blankly at the open ground before him. He'd have sworn it was, but he must have got turned around in the dark fog. No, he turned around 3 times before he stopped, afraid of becoming dizzy again. The plane was gone. It was gone. He was sure it had lain just 50 feet beyond that one stone, the tallest one. He'd taken note of it as a marker to keep his bearings. He walked out to the spot where he was sure Dolly had come down, walked slowly around the stones in a wide circle, glancing from one side then the other in growing confusion. Not only was the plane gone, it didn't seem to have ever been there. There was no trace, no furrow in the thick meadow grass, let alone any kind of gouge in the earth that such a crash would have made. Had he been imagining its presence, wishful thinking? He shook his head to clear it, but in fact it was clear. The buzzing and whining in his ears had stopped, and while he had bruises and a mild headache, he was feeling much better. He walked slowly back around the stones, still looking, a growing sense of deep cold curling through his wing. It wasn't effing there. So Um, so poor Jerry has had a real shock when he can't even find his plane after he clearly saw it. What are your thoughts,
Yes.
Mary, on this little bit? What do you think what Jerry's thinking here? He
Oh
must be
my
like
gosh.
losing it.
You talk about your echoes, and this is just such an echo to me about Claire when she got out the first time traveling, having that
Looking for
newbie
her
time
car,
traveler eyes. Yes,
looking for
knowing
the
like,
car.
wait, what exactly? Like, whether it's
Yes,
a
it
plane
was
or a
very
car,
much an
like, I
echo of
got
that.
here somehow, and now my mode of transportation has suddenly disappeared. Like, how the heck did I get here if my car or my plane isn't here?
Right. It's like
So,
you talk about missing your socks. He's missing his whole plane.
exactly,
So,
exactly. But the fact that he's starting to feel better physically, the buzzing isn't happening anymore. You're
mhm.
feeling that relief for him, and you realize for him to bring it up again now, you realize what an impact it does physically take on these people as they travel through the stones,
Yes,
especially if they're
because
not
he was
prepared
out.
for it.
Yeah, he was out until nighttime. Moon was
Hmm.
up and everything,
Hmm.
so he was knocked out from it.
Yeah.
Um, so he wakes in the morning without any notion of where he was. He must have curled up and just kind of passed back out. And he wakes to the scent of grass and cow poo. And the sky overhead is like this dizzy void. And he fortunately he recognizes like he's still in Northumbria. And he felt like something important had been misplaced, torn off somehow
Yeah.
and left behind. And in a state of agitation, his goose flesh reminds him of Dolly's notebook of big words, and that motivates him. Again,
Hmm.
we get the reminder of Dolly and Roger. So it
Yes.
says, horripilation. That's the proper word for goose flesh. Dolly had told him that. She kept a little notebook and wrote down words that she came across in her reading. She was a great one for the reading. She'd already got wee Roger sitting in her lap to be read to after tea, round-eyed as Bonzo at the colored pictures in his rag book. The thought of his family got him on his feet, swaying, but all right now, all right, better, yes, definitely better, though he still felt as though his skin quite didn't fit. The plane, where was that plane? He had looked around him. No plane was visible anywhere. Then it came back to him with a lurch of the stomach. Real, it was real. He'd been sure the night before he was dreaming or hallucinating. He laid down to recover himself. He must have fallen asleep, but he was awake now, no mistake. There was a bug of some kind down his back. He slapped it viciously to squash it. His heart was pounding unpleasantly. His palms were sweating. He wiped them on his trousers and scanned the landscape. It wasn't flat, but it neither did it offer much concealment. No trees, no bosky dells. There was a small lake in the distance. He caught the shine of the water, but if he ditched in the water, surely to God he'd be wet. Maybe he'd been unconscious long enough to dry out, he thought. Maybe he'd imagined that he'd seen the plane near the stones. Surely he couldn't have walked this far from the lake and forgotten it. He'd started walking toward the lake out of sure inability to think of anything else, anything useful to do. Clearly time had passed. The sky had cleared like magic. Well, they'd have little trouble finding him at least. They knew he was near the wall. A truck should be along soon. He couldn't be more than 2 hours from the airfield. And a good thing, too, he muttered. He picked up an especially God-forsaken spot to crash. There wasn't a farmhouse or a paddock anywhere in sight, not so much as a sniff of chimney smoke. His head was becoming clearer now. He'd circle the lake, just in case, then head for the road. He might meet the support crew coming in. And tell them that I've lost the bloody plane, he asked himself aloud. Oh, right, come on, you wee idiot, think. Where did you last see it? He's freaking out, He's like, I'm going to tell these people I lost the damn plane.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
he's not a happy camper.
No.
So I can't imagine how rattled and confused he probably felt looking for this plane he saw before it's gone. He can't imagine this, right?
Hmm.
And on top of that, he's still in pain, but he's a pro. He's going to keep trying to do this. So,
Yeah.
what's your impression of Jerry at this point, given this tremendously stressful situation? How do you think he's coping? His process? Does he remind you of Roger here
Yes,
at all?
yes. To still
In
like,
what
I'm gonna
way?
still try to, and the fact that like I'm still going to try. I'm still going to
Yes.
try to do
His
something.
persistence.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm not just gonna like sit here and wallow and hope somebody comes and saves me. Like I am still gonna get up and try something and go start it. It may not work, but at
He
least I'm
tries to
trying.
take a methodical approach too, which is
Yes.
very much like Roger too, where he's like says, okay, let me like step A, step B. I'm going to circle the lake. I'm going to do this.
Hmm.
I'm going to do that. So I really am impressed with Jerry's calm in the face of this experience.
Agreed.
His mind is working in a very logical way, trying to solve this puzzle. He's not panicking. And he even finds like some normalcy in his brain by thinking of Roger and Dolly and her word book. And it gives us a little more insight to Dolly and how remarkable she is, you know?
Yeah.
And like Roger, he's like thinking logically, he's making a plan, he's assuming like reasonable things. He'll find a road, the truck will come, they'll show up looking for him. The area was flat, so he'll be spotted. Like he's trying to like think like if a plane's looking for him, he's open space, so that's good, you know? And he knows the plane is probably not in water, but something is not right. So what do you make of Jerry feeling that something important had been left behind? His disorientation, the feeling of something being missing.
Yes.
Is it just his journey through the stones, or that he feels something wrong, or do you think it's just that he has a little bit of the Mac mojo happening there, or what?
Yeah, no, I definitely think there is a little bit of the mojo going on, you know, where he's just like, I know something's off and I can't quite figure it out yet, but I'm going to, but it's definitely something there. For it to be mentioned, that's my opinion. And when you're reading it, you know, it's so funny because I don't know about you, Angela, but when I am dreaming, and it's very realistic, and yet there's little things where my brain says, no, this isn't right. This isn't right. And then you're able to almost like tell yourself in the dream, oh, don't worry, this is a dream. You know, you see him saying that, like, maybe I imagined my plane being there. So he's really trying to figure it out. Like, okay, brain, like we're with it generally. Something isn't working. So
and Terry says he talks himself through it like Roger always does.
Yes.
Like Roger always talks himself through things.
Yes.
And the exasperation, Jane says, like Roger. There's a lot of like little Roger cues, which I love. So in a broader sense, he's left behind his family, friends, and time. So it's basically like everything he knows has been left behind. So what do you think Frank Randall will make of Jerry's disappearance? And do you think this triggers in his mind when Claire disappears and returns with her story when she was near the stones? Will he see a connection that his guy also, because they would have found his plane with no Jerry and stones right by, just like they found the car with no Claire and stones nearby. Do you think that Frank would be like?
I think you know, Frank would be thinking about this guy when Claire came back. Obviously, you know what I mean. That's when it's like, all right, this is obviously the common denominator. Obviously, you know, because that's clear.
For him to mention it to Claire, I mean, it stayed in his mind, you know, because this is not when, if he was going to die, if he was going to go, was supposed to be in Northumbria when he's home.
Exactly,
you know what I mean?
exactly.
So, like, this wasn't a dangerous mission.
In the moment, you know, obviously, like, he's not even talking to Claire. Like, Frank is on mission right now. He's working with the other pilots because Jerry was one of four, right? One of four people who were going to be doing this in the same day. So, on the, you know, when you're in the moment, sadly, you can't be going and finding this you can't spend too much energy and too much effort when you still have these other three pilots that you have to go and do this mission. You know, you're in a war right now. So, I don't know what was going through his mind, but I worry a little guilt, you know, like, I do this and what happened to him, and we never figured it out, you know.
It's a huge thing that he just disappears in thin air like this, you know what I mean? When it's like it's in their home country and they're just sitting there, you know, in this like deserty area. So Frank Randall, I think, was just as confused as everybody else was, and he would have found Jerry's plane. And the flight path was known, you know, so they would have known where to look. And there's no sign of the pilot. I think it would have stayed in his mind.
Yeah.
And since he made the assignment in the first place, it's possible that he even was involved in the subsequent investigation, because there would have been an investigation of what happened to the pilot. And so I think he would have been staying on top of it because it was his mission, you know.
Exactly.
And I think in this
connection,
I think it would have made him think of when Claire comes back and her recount of time travel. I think it would have added another little, like, believable light to it, that he remembers this incident, that this pilot just disappeared. And the question of what Frank knew and when he knew, it's always kind of been an intriguing thing for me. Yeah. And so this is like another little level in there that we have to now factor in that happened in his past.
Yeah.
You know, and if Jerry's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery for MI6, I think that Frank would have at least thought about this when Claire returned and she told her story. And later when he researched Jamie Fraser and all the other stuff, I think he probably suspected more, maybe this is what happened.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more in the afterbuzz on that too. Diana's keeping it very mysterious, and I have a bunch of wags on it. So, and I could probably do a Frank Wag show if I wanted to. You know what I mean? Honestly, but I probably would get stoned by the audience. You know, if I did, because there's like too many Frank haters that would never want me to do a show like that. Anyway, so section 10, last section. He walked for a long time. Slowly, Jerry's knee starts feeling better, but not his mind. He knows something is wrong with this landscape, you know, because he has spent a week now or two practicing for this, you know. So, you know, this is the day before Halloween when he goes down. So this had been 2 weeks when he got the mission. So he's been like going over this same area a lot of times, looking at it from the air. So he knows like something's wrong with this, you know, like this is not the way it looked exactly. And so he's puzzled by how rugged the countryside is. It's more rugged than it was. He found a road, but it's a dirt road. He's hungry. He amuses himself by imagining food, you know, both good and awful. And after an hour, he comes to Hadrian's Wall. He sits down, he rests, he's rubbing his knee, and he's laughing about why it was built in the beginning. He's trying to like amuse himself in this situation. And he's puzzled by how empty this land is. He's like, you know, there's no houses. There's hardly anything. There's no signs of his plane, no vehicles, no planes in the sky that should be practicing.
Yeah.
You know, no people. And he's starting like to question his own sense of reality. Like, am I losing my mind here? You know, then hallelujah, he sees a farmhouse, and it struck him as familiar, though he says I never saw it. So I'm curious about what that means. So then our last clip, Mary, I'm going to read it again. So he goes out, he says, where the bloody hell is everybody? The sun, okay, wait a minute. Stone built, squat, but quite large, ratty looking thatch. There was smoke coming from the chimney, though. He limped toward it as fast as he could go. There was a person outside, a woman in a ratty long dress and an apron feeding chickens. He shouted as she looked up, her mouth falling open at the sight of him. Hey, he said, breathless from hurry. I've had a crash. I need help. Are you on the phone, maybe? She didn't answer. She dropped the basket of chicken feed, ran right away around the corner of the house. He sighed in exasperation. Well, maybe she'd gone to fetch her husband. He didn't see any signs of a vehicle, not even a tractor. Maybe the man was tall, stringy, bearded, and snaggletooth. He was also dressed in a dirty shirt, baggy short pants that showed his hairy legs and bare feet, accompanied by two other men in similar comic attire. Jerry instantly interpreted the looks on their faces and didn't stay to laugh. Hey, no problem, mate, he said, backing up, hands out. I'm off, all right? They kept coming slowly, spreading out to surround him. He hadn't liked the looks of them to start with, and he was liking them less by the second. Hungry they looked, with a speculative glitter in their eyes. One of them said something to him, a question of some kind, but the Northumbrian accent was too thick for him to catch more than a word. Who was the word? And he hastily pulled out his dog tags from the neck of his blouse and waving the red and green discs at them. One of the men smiled, but not in a nice way. Look, he said, still backing up. I didn't mean to. The man in the lead reached out a horny hand and took hold of Jerry's forearm. He jerked back, but the man, instead of letting go, punched him in the belly. He could feel his mouth opening and shutting like a fish's, but no air came in. He flailed wildly, but they were all on him then. They were calling out to each other, and he didn't understand a word, but the intent was plain as the nose he managed to butt with his head. It was the only blow he landed. Within minutes, he had been efficiently beaten into a pudding, had his pockets rifled, been stripped of his jacket and dog tags, been frog marched down the road, and heaved bodily down a steep, rocky slope. He rolled, bouncing from one outcrop to the next until he managed to fling out an arm and grab onto a scrubby thorn bush. He came to a scraping halt and lay with his face in a clump of heather, panting, thinking incongruously of taking Dolly to the pictures just before he joined up. They'd seen The Wizard of Oz, and he was beginning to feel creepily like the lass in that film. Maybe it was the resemblance of the Northumbrians to scarecrows and lions. At least the effing lion spoke English, he muttered, sitting up. Jesus, now what? It occurred to him that he might be a good time to stop cursing and start praying.
Oh,
So, Mary, thoughts on this first encounter he has with humans, Mary? How must he be feeling right now?
Like he is in the ultimate worst nightmare ever.
Ever.
It just went from bad to worse. I loved the little Wizard of Oz,
Yes,
echo as
because she
well.
always refers to Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland. Those
Yes.
are two things that she always kind of echoes in like the way people feel when they're like out of their own world and all that stuff. She does that a lot,
Yes.
which I love. Go
And
ahead.
once again, his humor comes through. Even though he's beaten to a bloody pulp, he's thrown down this, and he's able
Thrown
to
off a
joke about the
cliff,
lion.
rolling down a rocky cliff thing. Oh my
Yep.
God. So this is what really upset me or hurt me or whatever you want to call it is I'm banging. See, I did that and I'm still banging. I'm probably gonna hear boom, boom, boom on the playback. Um, so I feel really bad for Jerry because imagine this, Mary. He would if you're a pilot, right, in World War II, pilot out there fighting for the country,
Yep.
right? You come down in your
I'm so
country,
small.
okay, you're expecting to be greeted with warmth, with gratitude. People like, here's the soldier defending us, fighting for us against Hitler,
Yes.
blah, blah. You're expecting to be like graciously brought
Cup
into
of
their
tea.
home.
Yeah.
Like, what can we do for you? Thank you for your service, all that stuff.
Yep.
And instead of getting any kind of respect, he gets like robbed, beaten, thrown off the cliff. Like this is like he's probably thinking, what in the hell?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and it must be so disheartening. Here's this guy putting his life on the line in his own country, and he's
Mhm.
going to get beat to death. And he's disorientated, hurting from the crash, hungry, starving now, like practically. And now he's assaulted and robbed by his fellow countrymen,
I
you
can't
know?
handle it. Yeah.
And he's thinking, how much worse can this get? God only knows like the questions in his mind right now.
Yes.
So it's almost as though he came down in enemy territory. His Polish isn't doing him no good. You know what I
Nope.
mean?
Nope.
Not gonna
Exactly.
help him.
Honestly, showing his
But
dog tags, and they're like, whatever, we're just gonna run you.
yeah,
I
they're
think
like,
it's
whatever,
so
dude. We're
bad for
ripping your
him.
dog tags off. Thank you.
Yep.
But he keeps like this self-deprecating humor through it. So it's also very like Roger. Do you think? Let me ask you this last question.
Yeah.
Do you think it's easier or harder situation for Jerry or Claire being in this situation as a young man as opposed to a woman? Both from the same time because they're both from World War II era.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who would be easier accepted? Do you think?
Ooh.
Good
Ooh.
question, right? Because in one hand, she's
I
a
would rather be
woman
a
at a
man.
time where women had no agency or rights.
Yeah.
But he was a man, therefore more threatening to people than a woman would be. So less accepted, you know what I mean, by a strange man because
Good
you're
call.
more threatening. So what do you think if Claire met people thankfully who helped her even though they were suspicious of her?
Yeah.
But would you rather be a man in that situation or a woman in that situation?
I'd rather be a man. I think Claire got really, really lucky.
Yes.
I would much rather be a man because honestly, like
You guys on the board, let me know if you'd rather be a man or a woman in this situation. A woman where you have no say, no rights, no nothing, or
yeah,
a man who would be more suspected than a woman who doesn't, nobody really sees her as a threat. So,
because I might just get like killed right away. Like if I'm a major threat, I think that's what those people try to do: beat him to a bloody pulp, throw him down a hill. I'd be afraid if I was a woman that I would just be like someone's slave or raped all the time or
yeah.
Whereas with a man, they're either gonna be my friend, they're gonna help me get some work, and or they're just gonna kill me, and I won't have to worry about living a terrible long life enslaved in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I would have chosen to be a man.
All right, so I don't know what I would be, because like you see, they immediately saw him as a threat and they like beat him up. They
I
wouldn't
mean,
have done that
Jamie
to a woman.
Fraser's gonna be the first person to find me. I will be a woman, like hands down.
Yes.
I'm not here to be his best friend.
Yes.
But
So before we wrap, Mary, you have any predictions for the remainder of the story? What's going to happen? I mean, we know a little bit about what happens, but do you have any other thoughts?
I hope I get to see a little bit older version of Roger. I don't know. I want to see how things like happen with his wife, with Dolly. Like I want to know like if there's communication to her with what happens. I'm interested to see how everyone reacts. You know, I'm interested to see, like, are we going to get that angle because of this love story, because she is referenced so much. Yes, we can always be present with Jerry and involved in the time traveling and what he's going through, but for me, so many mentions of the love story, I want to be checking in on Dolly a lot.
Okay. And do so you have any outrageous predictions or outlandish predictions or anything like that?
I wish
Okay.
I did. I wish I did.
All right. Let me see. So that's all I have. Let me let you remind everybody again that we are having our after buzz. I'll put on my little bye music. I have a special song. Hopefully it'll play. So we have our after buzz after this. I hope you can stay and join me. Well, that's not what I want. Okay. And,
The audible guy strikes again.
Yes, honestly. Here we go. I did Dust in the Wind for our closing music. So we will have our after buzz. Give me like 5 minutes, and I will go over. I have a few Diana dates to share on this reconnaissance missions and a few other things as well. So, all right.
Thank you so much, Angela. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.